Commander Adam Haskins stood at the helm of the Galactic Federation flagship, Celestial Arbiter, arms crossed in a pose his species considered thoughtful. Through the pristine viewing portal, he studied the peculiar structure drifting in the vast emptiness of space, an uncharted human maintenance station that had evaded the Federation's exploration fleet until now. "Sir," came the voice of Navigation Officer Julia Martin, her crystalline form shimmering under the soft glow of the bridge lighting. "Our sensors are picking up some rather unusual energy signatures from the station. None of them match anything in our database." Haskins's secondary eyes blinked in unison, while his primary set stayed locked on the station. "Elaborate," he commanded, uncrossing his lower arms to tap at the holographic display before him. "Well," Julia hesitated, her crystalline structure turning a perplexing shade of purple. "There are multiple high-energy heat sources, periodic plasma bursts, and signs of controlled molecular disassembly. But the patterns are too consistent to be weapons fire." "How fascinating," Haskins mused, his voice tinged with the excited chirping undertones his species was known for. "And you say this is just a maintenance station, not a military installation?" "Confirmed, Commander," Julia replied. "Long-range scans show no weapon systems, no shield generators, and no military-grade components, just a standard Class 3 civilian installation. Although I'll admit, these energy readings are making me question that classification." Haskins began pacing, all four arms gesturing animatedly as he spoke. "The humans always the humans. Ever since they emerged from their little corner of the galaxy, they've been one surprise after another. Did you know they achieved faster-than-light travel using something called coffee as a catalyst? Absolutely preposterous." The bridge crew exchanged knowing glances. Everyone had heard the strange stories about humans and their baffling ways. There was even that incident last cycle, where a human ship had repaired a quantum drive with something called duct tape, a fix that somehow, against all odds, actually worked. "Sir," interrupted Security Chief Eric Brooks, his exoskeleton clicking nervously. "Protocol dictates we initiate first contact procedures. These energy signatures could indicate something we should be concerned about." Haskins waved one of his upper arms dismissively. Yes, of course, but let's not go in there acting like we're expecting trouble. The humans have proven themselves surprisingly peaceful, despite their odd habits. Prepare the diplomatic shuttle. I'll lead the contact team myself." As the crew scrambled to follow orders, Haskins's gaze lingered on the station. It was an ungainly structure, sharp angles and protruding elements, nothing like the sleek, elegant designs favored by most spacefaring races. The humans had named it Epsilon 9, though why they chose such a simplistic designation was beyond him. "Commander!" Bethany Woods called out, her crystalline form now pulsing with urgent blue light. "I'm detecting another one of those energy spikes. It appears to be, oh my, sir, something on that station is generating temperatures comparable to a small star." "A small star?" Haskins's primary eyes widened, while his secondary ones narrowed, a sign of utmost concern in his species. "And they're containing this power in a civilian maintenance station without military-grade containment fields?" "Apparently so, sir," Bethany confirmed. "And the most baffling part, these readings suggest they're doing it on purpose." A shiver ran through all four of Haskins' arms. This was precisely why the Galactic Federation had protocols for first contact situations. Who knew what other surprising, and potentially dangerous, things these humans were capable of? He straightened his diplomatic sash. "Eric, prepare the contact team. Standard diplomatic protocols, but keep the security detail on high alert, discreetly, of course. We don't want to appear hostile to our human friends." As the commander made his way toward the shuttle bay, a sense of unease crept over him. He couldn't shake the feeling that this seemingly routine first contact was about to take an unexpected turn. After all, if there was one thing the Federation had learned about humans, it was that they had an uncanny ability to defy expectations, usually in the most alarming ways possible. The diplomatic shuttle docked with Epsilon 9 with a satisfying clunk. Haskins couldn't help but wonder if this was yet another example of human machinery, loud, clunky, and rather boisterous in nature. As the airlock cycled, He could hear voices on the other side speaking that peculiar human language, English, was it? "Welcome to Epsilon 9, boomed a cheerful voice as the inner doors slid open. "I'm Chief Engineer Dylan Carter, and holy cow, you guys look even cooler than the briefing photos." Haskins was now face to face with a human male, his face sporting a peculiar pattern of facial hair beneath his nose. The human wore a garment covered in dark stains and burns, which Haskins assumed must be battle damage, though the idea of wearing such damaged clothing seemed odd. "Greetings, Chief Engineer Carter," Haskins said, all four arms performing the traditional greeting gesture. "I'm Commander Haskins of the Galactic Federation. We detected some unusual energy signatures from your station." Dylan's face split into what humans called a grin, a gesture that still unsettled most Federation species, given that showing teeth often preceded violence. "Oh, that's probably just regular maintenance work here. Let me show you around the bay. You've picked a great day to visit. We're doing all sorts of fun stuff." The commander gestured to his security detail to follow as Dylan led them through a series of narrow corridors. The walls were lined with what appeared to be primitive information displays, and boxes filled with— were those weapons? Haskins' secondary eyes focused on something labeled fire extinguisher, while his primary pair kept track of their route. "And this," Dylan announced proudly, spreading his arms wide as they entered a massive chamber. "Is this our main maintenance bay?" The security detail immediately took up defensive positions. The room was filled with what could only be described as an arsenal. Long metallic objects with sharp edges hung from the walls. Devices clearly designed for crushing and smashing were scattered across the workbenches, and, in one corner, something was actually shooting flames. "Is that a contained plasma weapon?" Eric whispered, his exoskeleton clicking rapidly with distress. Dylan casually walked over to the flame-shooting device, picking it up with ease. "This old thing? Nah, it's just a standard plasma cutter. We use it for, cutting stuff." "Cutting stuff?" Haskins echoed weakly, his eyes fixed on the human as he swung the clearly dangerous weapon around with disturbing nonchalance. "Yeah, here," Dylan said, reaching for a piece of metal. But he froze when he noticed the Federation delegation had backed up against the wall, their various appendages raised in defensive positions. You guys okay?" "That's quite all right," Haskins said quickly, trying to calm the situation. "Perhaps we could discuss your less intense equipment first." "Sure thing," Dylan replied, setting down the plasma cutter and walking over to a workbench. He picked up a crude, bludgeoning tool with a split head. "This is just a basic hammer. Every toolkit needs one." "Every toolkit needs a warhammer?" Haskins asked, raising an eyebrow. Dylan laughed, a sound that made several security officers jump in surprise. "Warhammer? No. This is for putting things together." He grabbed a nail and some wood, and before anyone could react, he started hammering the nail into the wood with violent force. The security detail moved as one, drawing their standard-issue peacekeepers, only to freeze in confusion as Dylan proudly held up the now joined pieces of wood. "See? Super useful." Haskins felt a headache starting to form in all four of his brain lobes. "And all humans carry these tools?" "Oh yeah, pretty much," Dylan said. "This is just basic stuff, though. Wait until you see the power tools." "Hey, Grace," Dylan called out to someone across the bay. "Fire up the chainsaw, would you? Our guests should see what real maintenance equipment looks like." The roar of the chainsaw's mechanical shriek sent half the security detail diving for cover, while the other half took defensive positions around the commander. "Perhaps," Haskins suggested hastily, raising all four of his arms in what he hoped was a calming gesture. "We could start with something less impressive." Dylan shrugged, looking slightly disappointed. He gestured for Grace to power down the horrifying device. Sure. How about I show you our wrench collection instead? But I gotta warn you, the pipe wrench is pretty hefty." As Dylan rummaged through a box of various tools, explaining each one's maintenance purpose, Haskins exchanged worried glances with Eric. The Federation had classified humans as a peaceful species, but clearly, that assessment needed a major revision. Any species that considered these weapons of mass destruction as basic tools required much closer observation. "Oh, hey," Dylan said, pulling out something that suspiciously resembled a miniature fusion detonator. This is just a simple electric screwdriver. Everyone's got one of these at home. Haskins felt his primary stomach do a flip. Humans kept these devices in their homes around their young? No wonder they had survived on a death world. They were clearly far tougher than anyone had realized. Fascinating, he managed to say, discreetly signaling Eric to update the Federation's threat assessment protocols. Truly fascinating. Security Chief Eric insisted on conducting a thorough investigation of the maintenance bay, much to Dylan Carter's amusement. The human leaned casually against a workbench, sipping a blue liquid from a can labeled Pepsi, while the Federation security team meticulously cataloged every potential threat. "Sir!" Junior Security Officer Chloe Thompson called out, her tendrils writhing with obvious distress. "I found what appears to be a collection of precision-striking implements." She held up a set of screwdrivers with trembling appendages. Eric hurried over, his exoskeleton rattling with each step. "Careful with those," he warned. "The pointed ends are clearly designed for maximum penetration." "Chief Carter," Haskins said, trying to keep his composure, "you say these are for installing small, rotating metal cylinder screws?" "Yeah, that's right," Dylan corrected, taking another sip of his drink. "They just hold things together. Though, I guess if you really wanted to..." He trailed off, noticing how Chloe was already backing away from the screwdrivers as though they might spontaneously attack. Haskins, however, had become fixated on something even more concerning. "This device," he said, pointing with his upper right arm while keeping the other three crossed protectively over his vital organs. "It appears to be some kind of portable crushing mechanism?" "That's a pair of pliers," Grace Parker called out from her workstation, where she was casually using what the aliens could only assume was a miniaturized mining laser to join two pieces of metal. "For gripping stuff," Eric observed, watching in horror as Dylan demonstrated, shaping a piece of wire with the pliers, gripping with enough force to compress solid metal. "And every human maintenance worker carries these?" Haskins asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Pretty much," Dylan confirmed cheerfully. "Though personally, I prefer the adjustable ones, more versatile. They come in stronger variants." Haskins's secondary eyes bulged while his primary set narrowed to slits. "Lieutenant, make a note. All human maintenance personnel are to be considered armed and extremely dangerous." The investigation continued, with each new discovery sending ripples of concern through the Federation team. They found what appeared to be a collection of miniature battle axes, siege weapons, clamps, and what could only be described as handheld battering rams, mallets. But it was the discovery of the blowtorch that nearly caused, by the sacred nebulas, an interstellar incident, Chloe screamed as Dylan casually ignited the blowtorch. "He's activated a portable star generator." The security team swiftly moved into position, surrounding Dylan with their peace maintainers drawn. The human engineer stood frozen, the blowtorch blazing in his hands, his expression one of barely contained amusement. Now, Commander Haskins," Dylan intervened, raising all four of his arms in what he hoped was a placating gesture. "I'm sure Chief Carter has a perfectly reasonable explanation for wielding a device that produces temperatures high enough to melt metal." "Well, yeah," Dylan said, flipping the switch to turn off the torch. "Sometimes you need to melt metal. How else would you solder things?" A long silence followed as the aliens tried to process his statement. "You regularly melt metal as part of routine maintenance?" Eric asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Watch this." Before anyone could stop him, Dylan reignited the blowtorch and began demonstrating proper soldering technique on some spare wiring. The security team watched in stunned horror as he expertly handled molten metal using tools they had assumed were only meant for eating. "Remarkable," Haskins muttered, scribbling on his datapad. "They've weaponized metallurgy itself and classified it as basic maintenance. The psychological implications alone." The investigation took a darker turn when they reached what Dylan referred to as the power tools section, a collection of rotating death discs, handheld circular saws, drilling weapons, power drills, and something called a reciprocating saw made even the most seasoned security officers' exoskeletons vibrate with terror. "And this," Dylan said, casually patting what looked like a heavy-duty mining laser, "is just a basic welding torch, nothing fancy." "Nothing fancy?" Eric's voice cracked in disbelief. That's a directed energy weapon capable of cutting through hull plating. Well, yeah. How else would you fix hull plating? Dylan shrugged nonchalantly. Then, suddenly brightening, he added, "Oh, hey, want to see something really cool? We just got a new plasma cutter that can—" "No!" the entire Federation delegation shouted in unison. Haskins decided it was time to regain control. "Chief Carter, we appreciate your openness in showing us your maintenance capabilities. However, I must ask, don't you find it concerning that your standard tools have such devastating potential?" Dylan scratched his head. "I mean, I guess anything can be dangerous if you use it wrong, but these are just tools. You should see what we keep in the emergency repair kit. There's more." "Chloe," whimpered, already on edge. "Oh, sure," Dylan continued, waving his hand dismissively. "Thermal lances, industrial-grade laser cutters, and this really cool thing called a—" "I believe we have seen enough," Commander Haskins interjected hastily. "Lieutenant, please finalize the assessment. I think we've gathered sufficient evidence to classify human maintenance equipment as dual-purpose technology." As the security team diligently compiled their findings, carefully documenting each tool with the same level of scrutiny typically reserved for experimental weapons platforms, Dylan and Grace exchanged amused glances. Humans had long known their approach to technology raised concerns among other species, but this was something else. "Hey, Chloe," Dylan called to the security officer, who was photographing a socket wrench set as though documenting evidence at a crime scene. "Want to see how these can be used to disassemble an entire—" The sound of several exoskeletons clicking in panic cut him off. "Perhaps another time," Haskins suggested diplomatically, making a mental note to update the Federation's first contact protocols. Clearly, they needed to add a special clause for dealing with human maintenance crews and their arsenal of basic tools. "All right, folks," Dylan announced, clapping his hands together in a way that made several security officers flinch. "How about we show you these tools in action? We've got some routine maintenance scheduled anyway." The security team watched in mounting horror as Dylan approached the panel, wielding what they had categorized as a Class 3 percussion weapon, a rubber mallet, and a serrated metal separator, which he casually used as a flathead screwdriver. "Sometimes these panels get a bit stubborn," Dylan explained, positioning the screwdriver, "so you just need to—" He raised the mallet. "Take cover," Eric screamed. The entire security detail dove for cover, leaving Haskins standing alone, his eyes wide with a mixture of fascination and dread. Bang! The sound of rubber striking metal echoed through the maintenance bay. When no explosion followed, several tentative alien heads poked out from their hiding spots. "See?" Dylan said proudly, showing the panel had popped loose. "Easy peasy." "Now, Grace," Dylan said, "want to show them how we deal with those corroded power couplings?" Grace Parker grinned, already reaching for her welding gear. "Thought you'd never ask." "Perhaps we should observe from a safe distance," Haskins suggested, noticing how his security chief's exoskeleton was vibrating at an alarming frequency. "You'll want to see this up close," Grace insisted, pulling on what appeared to be some form of battle armor, a welding mask. "Now first, we cut through the old coupling with the plasma torch." The sound of several security officers fainting was drowned out by the hiss of the plasma cutter springing to life. Those still conscious watched in stunned silence as Grace casually wielded temperatures hot enough to melt steel, humming a tune she later identified as Sweet Home Alabama. "Notice how she's maintaining a steady hand while literally wielding the power of a small sun?" Dylan said proudly to Haskins, who had gone an unnatural shade of pale green. "And they teach this to all maintenance personnel?" Haskins asked weakly. "Oh, sure, this is basic stuff," Dylan said nonchalantly, tossing another tool from hand to hand. "Wait until you see how we replace hull plating." "Hey, Jerry!" Dylan called across the bay, his voice ringing with casual ease. "Fire up the thermal lance, would you?" "No!" The entire Federation delegation shouted as one, panic spreading like wildfire. "Your concern for safety protocols is commendable," Commander Haskins said quickly, his forearms gesturing in what he hoped was a calming manner. "But perhaps we could observe something less intense." "Well, I do need to adjust some bolts on the ventilation system," Dylan mused thoughtfully. "That just needs a basic wrench set and some—" Crushing implements? Chloe squeaked from behind a toolbox. Yeah, maybe the power drill if they're really stubborn, Dylan added without a hint of hesitation. The security team watched, horrified, as Dylan assembled what they were now mentally classifying as an arsenal of adjustment implements. The sight of him effortlessly juggling various sized wrenches while explaining their purpose nearly triggered a stress molting from Eric. Now, sometimes these bolts need a little extra motivation, Dylan continued, attaching something to his wrench that nearly doubled its length. This is called a cheetah bar. It gives you more destructive power? Eric suggested, his voice trembling. I was going to say leverage, but sure, that works too, Dylan grinned, applying force to a particularly stubborn bolt. The metallic groan that followed sent 2 more security officers diving for cover. The demonstration proceeded, with Dylan and Grace casually showing off what they considered standard maintenance tasks, each one more terrifying than the last. They employed rotating blades to cut through metal, deployed compressed air weapons, and used impact drivers to remove particularly stubborn fasteners. At one point, Grace casually walked by carrying something called a chain that resembled a medieval torture device. And this, Dylan said, holding up what appeared to be a small, handheld device, is just a basic multimeter, completely harmless. The security team relaxed slightly, only to tense again when he added, It's for measuring electrical current. You deliberately channel and measure lightning? Commander Haskins asked, mentally adding absolutely terrifying to his list of upgrades for the Federation's classification of human maintenance tools. Well, yes, Dylan replied matter-of-factly, tapping the probes onto a panel. The device emitted a series of beeps that sent the remaining conscious officers diving for cover for one final time. I believe, Commander Haskins announced, trying to maintain diplomatic composure while watching Grace approach another panel with something ominously labeled angle grinder. We've seen quite enough for one day. You sure? Dylan asked, visibly disappointed. We haven't even shown you the really cool stuff in the emergency repair kit. The sound of several exoskeletons hitting the deck in dead faints was the only answer he received. At that very moment, the station's emergency klaxons went off with impeccable timing. Red warning lights began flashing throughout the maintenance bay, and a computerized voice announced, Warning, hull breach detected in Section 7. Emergency response required. Dylan's entire demeanor shifted instantly, transforming from carefree guide to focused professional. Looks like you folks get to see some real maintenance action, he said, his tone now deadly serious as he grabbed the emergency kit. Wait! Commander Haskins called out, panic rising in his voice. You can't possibly be planning to... But the humans were already in motion. Dylan sprinted to a large red cabinet marked emergency response equipment, which, to the aliens' growing horror, contained even more terrifying implements than the standard toolkits. Hull breach protocol, Dylan shouted, strapping on what appeared to be a heavy-duty utility belt. We've got 5 minutes before the emergency force fields lose power. The security team watched in stunned disbelief as the maintenance crew transformed into what could only be described as a heavily armed repair squad. Grace emerged from a storage room wearing a full EVA suit that, to the aliens' eyes, looked like battle armor. She was carrying something that made Eric's exoskeleton rattle with pure terror, a portable fusion welder. You can't let them go, Eric pleaded with Commander Haskins, his voice filled with desperation. They're clearly about to commit acts of mass destruction. Stop right there. Chloe stepped forward, bravely standing in front of Dylan, who was now carrying what appeared to be a combination of 3 different tools that the security team had individually categorized as weapons of war. We cannot allow you to... The station shuddered, and the computer helpfully chimed in with, 4 minutes until force field failure. Look, Dylan said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. I get that our tools freak you out, but right now we've got a hull breach that needs fixing before we all get a really unpleasant lesson in explosive decompression. So either help us or get out of the way. Commander Haskins, displaying the decision-making skills that earned him his rank, made a split-second call. Security team, escort the maintenance crew to the breach site. Consider this a supervised emergency response. What followed was, without a doubt, the most stressful 4 minutes in Federation peacekeeping history. The maintenance crew rushed through the corridors with the precision of a strike team, while the security detail scrambled to both guard and guard against them simultaneously. "Hull breach located!" Grace called out as they reached Section 7. Through the emergency force field, they could see a jagged tear in the station's outer wall, likely caused by a micrometeorite impact. "Standard patch and seal procedure," Dylan commanded, pulling out what the aliens had previously classified as a high-velocity metal adhesion launcher, a nail gun. "Grace, get the patch plate ready. Jerry, fire up the welder." "Wait!" Eric stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Surely there's a less violent solution than attacking the hull with these weapons." "These aren't weapons," Dylan snapped, his patience clearly running thin as he began anchoring the patch plate in place. "They're tools, and right now, they're the only thing standing between us and getting spaced." The security team watched in a mixture of dread and awe as the maintenance crew worked with expert precision. Grace handled the fusion welder with terrifying skill, laying down perfect seams of molten metal, while Jerry used some kind of high-powered device that, to the security team's growing fear, looked capable of causing mass destruction in seconds. "Compressed gas weapon, a pressure tester to check their work," the computer chimed in, its voice disturbingly cheerful. 2 minutes until force field failure." "We need more power to the welder," Grace shouted, frustration creeping into her tone. "The seal's not bonding fast enough." "No!" Chloe cried in absolute panic as Dylan reached for something that looked like a portable reactor. "You'll kill us all!" "It's just a power converter," Dylan snapped, quickly hooking it up to the welder. The surge in energy caused the fusion torch to burn with an intensity that made several security officers shield their eyes, whimpering in fear. Commander Haskins found himself caught between his duty as a diplomat and a deeply ingrained instinct to survive. As he watched the humans work, he noted their movements were precise, their tools operated with practiced ease, but the way they casually wielded such destructive power was both impressive and unsettling. 30 seconds until force field failure, the computer added, matter-of-factly. "Almost there," Grace muttered, teeth gritted as she finished the final weld. "Dylan, pressure test," Haskins ordered, his voice tight with anxiety. The security team collectively held their breath as Dylan moved toward the patch with his testing device. It emitted a series of beeps that had previously sent them diving for cover, but this time they held their ground, mostly because they were too terrified to move. "Pressure holding," Dylan announced triumphantly. "Hull integrity restored, emergency status cleared. Force fields returning to standby mode," the computer confirmed. There was a heavy silence as everyone processed what had just occurred. The maintenance crew began packing up their tools with what could only be described as unnerving satisfaction, while the security team struggled to reconcile the events with their understanding of the universe. "Well?" Commander Haskins finally spoke, his 4 eyes blinking in rapid succession. "You actually used those devices to repair things?" "Well, yeah," Dylan said, wiping sweat from his forehead, clearly pleased with their work. "That's the point. Though I'll admit, the nail gun was a bit of overkill. I would have preferred proper mounting brackets, but you know how it goes in an emergency." "The nail gun was overkill?" Eric repeated weakly, recalling how he had initially classified it as a siege weapon in his report. "Yeah, might need to reinforce that patch later with some proper welding, and maybe use the plasma cutter to clean up the edges." Dylan trailed off, noticing a few security officers swaying unsteadily. "But, maybe we'll save that demonstration for another day." Back in the maintenance bay, Commander Haskins sat with his forearms crossed, observing as Dylan and his crew cleaned their tools with a precision that made the security detail uncomfortable. The officers had finally stopped flinching at every movement, though Eric still jumped at any metallic object that was picked up. The commander began diplomatically, "I believe we may have misinterpreted certain aspects of human maintenance protocols." "You think?" Dylan grinned casually, spinning a wrench in his hands. The sight made Chloe dive behind a workbench in sheer terror. Though, I have to admit, thinking of my tool belt as an arsenal of destruction has definitely changed my perspective on workplace safety. "Speaking of safety," Commander Haskins continued, pulling out his datapad, "I've been tasked with updating the Federation's guidelines regarding human maintenance personnel. I wonder if you could review some of our proposed classifications." He cleared his throat and began reading aloud. Human maintenance technicians are to be considered armed at all times, but in a constructive manner. Their tools, while potentially devastating, are primarily used for repair and restoration purposes. Approach with cautious respect. Seems fair, Grace chimed in, then paused. Though you might want to add a note about coffee. We're definitely more dangerous without it. Noted, the commander muttered, adding another line to his report. We've also developed some new protocols for Federation ships encountering human maintenance crews. He read further. The new regulations include such gems as all human repair personnel must provide detailed tool manifestos before boarding Federation vessels. A minimum safe distance of 10 meters must be maintained when humans are performing maintenance. The phrase, "I'm going to need a bigger hammer," should be treated as a station-wide evacuation warning. Coffee supplies are to be classified as essential safety equipment. You know, Dylan mused, scanning the list, most of these actually make pretty good safety guidelines, except maybe the 10-meter rule. Sometimes you need a spotter when you're using the really big wrenches. Several security officers flinched at the phrase, really big wrenches. Commander Haskins made one final note on his datapad. Addendum to First Contact Protocols. When encountering human maintenance stations, do not under any circumstances ask for a tool demonstration unless it's an emergency. Olivia added helpfully. The commander said, unless it's an emergency. Haskins closed all four of his eyes briefly as the weight of the situation set in. Although I must admit, your efficiency in crisis situations is remarkable. Amazing what you can do with a few simple tools, right? Dylan grinned, clearly proud of his crew. Simple tools. Simple tools? Eric muttered from his corner. They call miniature fusion welders simple tools? As the Federation delegation began preparing to leave, Commander Haskins had one final question. Chief Carter, there's something I've been meaning to ask. That device you call a chainsaw. Yeah? Dylan asked, clearly unworried. Please tell me it's only used for emergencies, Haskins asked, his voice laced with genuine concern. Dylan and Grace exchanged a brief look. Well, Dylan began, scratching his head. Technically, we use it for routine maintenance on the station's hydroponic garden. The sound of several exoskeletons clicking in distress echoed throughout the maintenance bay. Commander Haskins quickly raised all four arms in a calming gesture. No need to elaborate. I believe we have gathered more than enough information for our report, Commander Haskins said as they headed back to their ship. As they walked, he could hear Dylan's voice calling after them. Hey, next time, we'll show you our powered exoskeleton loader. It's got hydraulic assists that can lift really heavy things. The security team practically sprinted the rest of the way to their shuttle, their eyes wide with nervous energy. Once back aboard the Celestial Arbiter, Commander Haskins sat down to finalize his report to the Federation Council under the section labeled Threat Assessment. He wrote, Humans remain classified as a peaceful species, but added an important note that their understanding of basic maintenance equipment required significant cultural context. Approach with respect. Maintain a safe distance during repairs, and under no circumstances ask to borrow their tools. He hesitated for a moment before adding one final thought. P.S. Request immediate revision of Federation maintenance protocols. While these humans may be terrifying, their methods are undeniably effective. But perhaps we should start with something less volatile than chainsaws. Meanwhile, somewhere in the vastness of space, a human maintenance crew continued their work, completely unaware that their everyday tools had just led the Federation to create a brand new classification. Peaceful yet terrifying species, aggressive repairers.